Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sidney Blumenthal. My colleague, Sean Wilentz of Princeton, is at the Einstein Forum in Berlin. And of course, he's at the Einstein Forum as one of the world's leading geniuses. So he won't be joining us today. But we're going to be addressing one of the most pressing issues that's coming to a town near you, if it already hasn't, and that is the incipient Trump police state, which is whose wedge is ICE, the immigrant enforcement police that is being directed from on high at Trump's orders by his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, and who, as a White House staffer, and I was a White House staffer, appears to have extraordinary powers and has called ICE officials to the White House and read them the riot act unless they met certain quotas. We're going to deal especially with the crisis in Los Angeles, because that is ground zero for this crisis. On June 7th, Donald Trump announced he would federalize California's National Guard, and he deployed thousands of soldiers in Los Angeles in response to protests against immigration enforcement raids. And then he deployed thousands of Marines. Governor Gavin Newsom requested a rescission. He said it violated the state's sovereignty and that he had not requested the troops. A lawsuit was filed on behalf of the state of California by the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, challenging the federal takeover of California's National Guard. Trump has announced he's flirting with the Insurrection Act. He's talked about invoking it, claiming the protests constitute a form of rebellion against the United States. He would know about that from January 6th. Then J.D. Vance, the vice president, whisked in and out of Los Angeles. He arrived, he came, he left, and he did a drive-by. He held a press conference in Westwood, which, if you don't know LA, is close to UCLA. It's where some of the National Guard are deployed. There's nothing going on in Westwood except shopping and people going to restaurants. He referred to Alex Padilla, the U.S. Senator, who was, while trying to ask a question of the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, hustled out of the room, forced to the ground, shackled. Vance referred to him as Jose Padilla rather than Alex Padilla. And then he said that the situation, since the Guard and the Marines had arrived, had gotten a lot better. And it was very much a necessary part of what's going on here. And that the protests could flare back up. Apparently, protests are the goal that must be achieved, suppressing them. And yet, if you've seen any videos on the internet of ICE chasing workers, it's still going on. Well, as it happens, I have someone here who really understands this, both from a high altitude and a ground level perspective. Dr. Manuel Pastor is the Distinguished Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. He currently directs the Equity Research Institute at USC. The Los Angeles Times named him as one of the region's most significant civic leaders. And he is an author of numerous books about economics and about Los Angeles, including a book called The Resistance, some years ago, very prescient title, about what's going on. And I'd like to begin our discussion by asking him whether or not Donald Trump's federalization of the California National Guard was justified. What was the situation in LA before this happened and that precipitated what Trump did?
So good to be with you, and glad that the audience is concerned about the way in which immigration enforcement has basically become a dry run for authoritarianism in the United States. What started to happen on June 7th was Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, beginning to do a series of raids in Los Angeles. Now, Trump, when he ran for office, when he came to power, talked about deportation of the worst, that is, of targeting criminals, people with felonies, problematic records. But of course, people like that are a little bit hard to catch. And Stephen Miller, frustrated that ICE was not meeting its quotas, basically said they should be going to Home Depots and 7-Elevens. And that is what happened. ICE got unleashed in Los Angeles and began raiding Home Depots, car washes, places where people go to work, because Los Angeles is a target-rich environment. You need to understand that of a county of about 10 million, nearly 1 million residents are undocumented. And about 72% of them have been in the country for longer than a decade.
They're integrated into the community, aren't they?
Very integrated. Part of our businesses, part of our faith institutions, part of our communities. And in fact, so integrated that that number of undocumented residents, undocumented Angelenos, is outnumbered by the number of U.S. citizen family members and green card holder, legal resident family members who live with them. So
how many people are we talking about?
About 1/5 of LA County is either undocumented themselves or a family member living with an undocumented person.
That's about 2 or more than 2 million people.
Slightly over 2 million.
And they're waging war on 2 million people.
Well, and so what you can understand is that that is a provocation, not just against immigrants, but against Los Angeles. And it was treated as such by the community. If you're watching what's going on, and you can watch it on video, I've been on the streets, both at the protests that have sometimes turned violent. But today, Sidney, I was at a gathering, and some people who arrived to the gathering announced that just half an hour earlier, they'd watched ICE whisk people off the streets on their way walking to this gathering. So there's terror unleashed in our streets, and there's anger on the part of community residents. Now, it had created situations where people were throwing water bottles, etc. But what really provoked anger was the arrival of the National Guard. The arrival of the National Guard, now about 4,000 National Guard folks in LA, and about 700 Marines, has provoked tremendous anger. And what's interesting about it is they don't know how to manage crowds. So they surge.
They're not trained.
They're not trained. So they surge to crowds, then they retreat, and the LAPD winds up getting caught in the middle. So Trump,
the LAPD is trained, however.
Yes, as are the county sheriffs. And so basically what Trump has done has made a bad situation worse. And then as things have calmed down because of the Los Angeles Police Department, Trump has claimed credit, saying the National Guard is doing something. They are not doing anything. And what has happened on our streets is masked men who are not identifiable as part of ICE or Homeland Security or the FBI are jumping out of unmarked vehicles and whisking people away from car washes and facing local community residents who are mad at them. Because what Trump is about is spectacle and cruelty. and making a reality television show of this enforcement. It is not serious in terms of going at people who might really be breaking the law or dealing with the problems of migration.
Yeah. So there were some violent incidents, but this area, give me a sense of the size of Los Angeles and where this was taking place and how extensive this was, and how Trump has talked about this as all of Los Angeles. And Vance came in and talked about it as needing to secure Los Angeles. Where did this take place? How widespread was this?
Los Angeles County is over 500 square miles, 10 million people. The area, I want to say that the area of violence is actually all over because the violence is ICE. The violence is ICE agents masked, not identifying themselves, ripping people away from bus stops, ripping away people who are street vendors, ripping away people who are washing cars. That's the widespread violence.
Yeah.
The violence that's been on TV
Yes.
is concentrated in about 5 to 6 blocks of downtown Los Angeles, where, uh, you know, uh, we do have people who've tried to agitate confrontations with the police. That has put up barricades, thrown water bottles, thrown metal, shot off fireworks, with the police responding with projectiles and flashbang grenades, eventually with tear gas. And in an article I wrote for Dissent, I was at one such event where the police wound up charging on horseback. But it's been very limited, and it's been a little bit of kabuki theater between practiced street agitators and practiced police who know how to manage these
So it's a very small group of people who've
It's a
done
very
that.
small group of people, but I've got to say something which I think is very risky here. When I was at City Hall on Sunday night with a series of events that led to the police charging, there was a small group of agitators, but there's a large group of young people who are very angry about ICE in their community. And they need to find a way to have their hot anger channeled, or hot rage channeled into the cold anger of organizing and strategy. And the task of our times is, how do we tap into this deep resentment, frustration that Trump is in power, and create an avenue for young people to be able to protest peacefully but effectively. And so it's a very small area. In fact, when I left that area on Sunday night, 4 blocks away, Grand Central Market was open, and people were dining outside. So it's been blown up to be a lot more than it is because it's about a reality television show. It's about demonizing immigrants. It's about demonizing blue states and about demonizing blue cities. It's about attacking a black mayor. It's about attacking a progressive governor. It's about creating a show rather than dealing with the serious issues that might be part of a conversation around immigration.
Yeah. So what you've described is a situation where ICE agents, directed from on top by Stephen Miller at the White House, have descended upon LA as a kind of test case or wedge into attacking many cities. And I know this is going on in many cities. And in my own neighborhood, this happened in Washington, D.C., which created a complete terror and aroused the entire neighborhood here in Washington, neighborhood in Washington, when they started raiding restaurants and other stores. And there were a few incidents in LA, and then the police apparently had this pretty much under control when the guard came in. from Trump, which is, you know, his television show. And while this is just summarizing, while this is restricted in terms of the TV show to a small area of downtown LA, um, it's going on all over LA and has really enveloped the whole area. And LA is a vast, vast city, and certainly the second largest city in the United States. It's the leading port to Asia. It is center of the California economy in great part. It is the center of the American economy, and it is before this happened, a successful minority majority society. Would you say that?
Well, it has been majority people of color since the late 1980s. And certainly, just as with the United States, as that change took place, there were conflicts, tensions, growing pains, but people have learned to live with one another. We have a progressive black mayor elected in a city,
Karen Bass,
where the electorate is only about 10% black, but where many people see in that person their own hopes and dreams, where people are not, they understand that what this has brought, the demographic change, is Korean taco trucks and vibrant enterprises and international trade and a variety of other things that have turned out to be quite positive. We also, in Los Angeles, understand how critical immigrants are to our future, including our recovery from the fires that happened in January. 1/3 of our construction labor force is undocumented. If we are going to rebuild from the fires, we actually need to make sure that that workforce is not scared of going to work. Almost a little bit over a quarter of the restaurant and hospitality industry is undocumented. And if you really want restaurants to thrive, an important part of our street culture, an important part of our contribution to America, you need to make sure that people feel safe. There's a reason why LAPD, the local police department, feels caught in the middle. They do not want to engage in enforcement of immigration laws, and they've promised basically not to. But they're having to protect National Guard who are provoking incidents. They're having to protect ICE when they're conducting raids that actually make people feel unsafe. Because when a masked man who's not identified and refuses to show any identification, which ICE agents refuse to do so, arrives in your neighborhood with guns and SUVs, how do you know that it's not just the equivalent of the Argentine military in the 1980s and 90s trying to disappear people, which is basically what it feels like. And the vastness of LA that you pointed to is that this is now the ICE activities occurring all over. It's occurring not just in Los Angeles, but in suburbs like Paramount and Bell and Whittier and Pico Rivera, places that have a lot of immigrants, but don't have a lot of immigrant rights organizations to protect them. Because ICE also knows that that's also not just a target-rich environment, but perhaps a resistance light environment where they can go. But that means that you've got a lot of working class residents who are pissed that their cousins, their relatives, their coworkers are being picked up, and they don't have the training about how not to engage with ICE, how to just film. And so this is a very dangerous situation that is being made dangerous on purpose so that you can have a TV spectacle.
Yes. So a very particular question. I have heard that there are contractors among ICE. And if that's so, I think there are a number of questions that have not yet been raised. And I wonder if you've heard any of these stories that some of them are bounty hunters and that they're being paid on bounties.
There's a lot of suspicion of that. We don't have much verification. The suspicion in part comes from that more recently, some of the people showing up are not just in unmarked vehicles, but they don't look like the black SUVs that ISIS used in the past. That their vests look like they were bought from Amazon rather than consigned from the federal government. So there's a lot of suspicion that this is going on.
I
And
just saw a video um, of an ICE raid at a car wash. And the ICE agents go in and they chase the workers around and arrest them. And they're all masked. And one of them on his back has a black t shirt. And in big block letters, it says Jesus. Now, I promise you that that was not issued by the federal government. And I wonder, either he's breaking regulations as a federal employee, or he could be a contractor, wearing his own clothes.
far more likely to be a contractor or a bounty hunter, as you point to. I do want to say one thing. I've always thought that California was America, just sooner. We went through our demographic shift statewide in the late 1990s, the one the U.S. is slated to go through in 2045 or so. We have been on the cutting edge of income inequality and of innovation, now of AI, something that's impacting the rest of the country. We experienced deep deindustrialization. In fact, more rapidly and more sharply because of the cuts in aerospace than the rest of the country. So we've done a lot of things first, and Los Angeles has been a little bit on the cutting edge of California in terms of the diversity, the income changes, the entertainment industry, international trade, etc. And what is happening here will be coming to you soon. What they're trying out is authoritarian tactics by taking national authorities against the will of local authorities.
Well, there's
This is
certainly
the
going to
first
be.
time since the 1960s that the National Guard has been federalized. The last time it was federalized was to help integration in the South. Now it's being federalized to help suppression in the Southland of California.
Southland's
And
what some people call Los Angeles as well, for people outside of LA.
yeah, and one of the things I think that is really striking is it's easy to think it's just going to happen here. But believe me, they're trying out what they want to do on the rest of the United States.
Well, we have a lot more to cover here. You talked about the transformation of California, both economically and politically, as taking place. I recall, the governorship of Pete Wilson. I did a long piece when I was a writer for the New Yorker on the rise and fall of Pete Wilson in 1995. And he had fallen on the question of immigration on Prop 189. And that was really the beginning of the fall of the Republican Party in California. And still a telling story of what's happened. California was a bastion of the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah. We gave you Richard Nixon. We gave you
Ronald
Ronald
Reagan.
Reagan. We gave you tax cutting fervor. We gave you anti immigration hysteria. We were one of the first states to do 3 strikes laws, targeted young black and Latino mostly folks to be arrested. Our over incarceration rates outpaced the rest of the country. it's been a remarkable turnaround. And I think that you're right to point to Prop 187
187. I
and
got
the
a
immigrant
yeah.
initiative that Pete Wilson sort of hitched his political wagon to, but wound up waking the Latino population into understanding that the GOP was not just concerned about undocumented immigrants, but seemed to be anti-Latino in its sentiments. But I would say that the other thing that was really important, Sidney, was the 1992 civil unrest, and for a very particular reason. That happened in LA.
This was the Los Angeles riot of 1992, and by the way, the guard was called in then as well.
Although with the cooperation, with the call of the governor, and of course the cooperation of the mayor,
This
because
is a very different situation.
that was not happening in 4 square blocks. That was happening
Right.
all over the city and actually the region. But I think the important thing about the 1992 civil unrest was that it helped progressives realize that as much as you could blame that on economic inequality, on a police force that had brutalized the local population, that if you have a city that's pissed off enough to burn itself down, and you have not been able to channel that into more
Mhm.
productive energy, there's not just something wrong with the system, there's something wrong with the progressive movement. And so what I would say is a really unique coming together of both this sort of reaction to Pete Wilson and this re-examination on the part of progressives about how do you actually build a durable majoritarian coalition that's multiracial, that's pro-democracy, that wants economic justice, and that brings all sorts of people in to the concept of a brighter future. I think there's sometimes a sense that Los Angeles, California, this just happened because of the demography. It actually happened because of really conscious political organizing, community organizing, and movement building to try to change the consciousness of Californians, to not fear immigrants, but to welcome them, to not accept the market and what it did, but to try to lift up economic justice. And that political work often gets unfeatured, and it is what we need to do right now. We can point to Trump and how bad he is, but we also need to examine why is it that a Trump became so successful, was able to move so many people, was actually able to capture a majority in this last election of the popular vote. We need to re-examine what we did wrong, not just how bad he is.
Tell me a little bit about what happened at Dodger Stadium. That really captured people's attention, where ICE attempted to come to Dodger Stadium and the Dodgers wouldn't let him pass the parking lot. And there's a long history involving the Dodgers and the community as well.
It's really very interesting. I think a little bit more has been made of that incident, but it turns out to be very important for reasons that you mentioned. Looks like ICE arrived at Dodger Stadium, but it's not clear that they wanted to enter to try to pick up people who work there. It looks like more they were trying to just find a place to park their vehicles between raids and to try to coordinate. But it turned out to be a unique opportunity for the Dodgers to push them completely off the lot and completely out of the driveway. It partly because the Dodgers were under tremendous pressure because they were not saying anything about ICE and the raids, even though they've got a fan base that's 40 to 45% Latino. They've got a reliance of probably about $300 million of their $1 billion in revenues comes from that Latino fan base by way of tickets, TV, and merchandise. And because they've always had a problematic relationship with the Latino community. Because Dodger Stadium was built on Chavez Ravine, in which they forced out Mexican-American residents who'd been established there to under the promise of creating a public housing project that was later turned into a baseball stadium. And so they've always had a problematic relationship with the community. It got a little bit better over the last couple of years, but for about a week, people were looking at the Dodgers saying, you should say something. You rely on Latino talent. You have Latino fans. You should say something about these ICE raids. And it gave the Dodgers an opportunity to push ICE off their driveway and to make a commitment to $1 million in assistance for immigrant families who find themselves distressed because their breadwinner has been removed by authorities. And I think it's really key to stress that particularly in LA, the number of people they're picking up who have a criminal record, minuscule. The number of people they're picking up who've been here for 20 years washing cars, large. And that means many more families affected, many more sympathies engendered.
Yeah, this is not the end of anything, and it's not only ongoing, but Los Angeles is not only ground zero for the attacks that are going on and the raids throughout the country in all sorts of cities involving similar things in other communities, but LA is going to be the host of some very major events coming up. Donald Trump went to Fort Bragg recently, right before his big military birthday parade here in Washington on June 14th. And he went to Fort Bragg and he said that he was really lucky to be president now and that God had made this possible because he was going to preside over the World Cup and the Olympics. And those are events that will be hosted in Los Angeles. And that creates a whole new situation involving what's going on because the whole world will be watching.
Well, from LA's point of view, we don't know how we're going to get our venues done on time if our construction workers are terrorized. We don't know.
There's not going to be an Olympics if ICE keeps arresting all the workers who are building the Olympic villages and so on in sites, is what you're saying.
It's a little more complicated because probably most of the workers on the villages, because those are big projects, are documented. But if you start eliminating the other parts of the labor force that are, for example, doing home building, remodeling, all the fire recovery, you're going to start pulling workers off the big sites into those other opportunities as well. There's going to be just a general shortage. We're going to have a restaurant and hospitality industry that's paralyzed by these ICE raids. And importantly, Sidney, you're going to have visitors from around the world who feel like this is not a safe place to go to, that they will, like we've seen some of our U.S. citizen brown-skinned people terrorized by ICE, that they're going to wind up finding themselves in a very uncomfortable situation. I think Donald Trump feels like he can stage a big World Cup and Olympics without actually welcoming the world. But I think it's going to look a little bit more like his military parade compared to the 4 to 6 million people who went out on the streets for the No King's Day. And I think we're really in a very interesting moment. We're going to see what plays out, whether or not this has been the overreach that begins to trigger a more mass reaction to the Trump administration. Because this obvious brutality, this obvious disruption of families, the way that it is, for example, it's very interesting. Just last week, I went to a prayer vigil that was on the steps of the federal building. For the 5 to 6 days before that, protesters who'd been shouting slogans, who'd been throwing bottles had not been able to get on the steps of the federal building. Faith leaders got on the steps and took the steps and held the steps. And I think in part that is an overreaction, or there's been a reaction to the overreach of the Trump administration on the part of good people who thought maybe that this would be about reaching out and targeting criminals, not about separating families. So we'll see. This could be a really important turning point.
Thank you very much. There's a lot more to say and a lot more to observe and a lot more to participate in. And the events are hardly over. We're at the beginning of the events. And most people who are thinking about this need to remember it's coming to a town and a city near you, what's going on in LA, and what's going to happen with the Olympics is going to be center stage in Los Angeles. Thank you, Manuel Pastor of the University of Southern California, for the Court of History, which is the ultimate court.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.